So you may or may not be as familiar with the platform. DataShare Santa Cruz County is an interactive data platform with local, regional, and national data available to everyone. The platform fulfills a need for accessible, reliable, quality data for advocacy, community research and engagement, grant writing, reporting, and program evaluation. And we are a collaborative project driven by values and shared goals, which aim to provide equity-centered and comprehensible data about Santa Cruz County to promote informed community action and evidence-based policy. So if you're less familiar with the site, this is our landing page. We get an average of 10,000 annual users. And we know that the data is actively being used in advocacy efforts by our local hospitals and mental health activists across the county. We know that the data spotlights, if you see on the top bar there, are really helpful for a lot of advocacy efforts because they focus on local relevant data sets such as housing or transportation. And we can customize those to local requests as well. And then always at a user's fingertips are over 400 quantitative data that you can just go ahead and search for in the search bar. Some of the main tools on the platform are the data sets, creating dashboards particular to your topic of interest, generating powerful reports, and being able to track local progress. Some of the ways this can look, here's some of the visualizations from the data offered on the site. So you can have an overview of the county or a region. So we have regional breakouts offered that clump the data into these 4 different regions. That can compare, the economic, social, and resource inequities and how these can interact and play out on racial and ethnic lines in our medium-sized community. So for example, in this visualization, you can see, the income disparities throughout the county. And while there is the comparison to the state value, showing that we have a larger income or higher income than other parts of California. We also have really high costs of housing, transportation, and childcare. And as Santa Cruz County is one of the most expensive places to live. So this just kind of shows also the median household income by race and ethnicity, and the disparity between the white population, which make over 40,000 more annually than our Hispanic Latino population. So this is the way that some of the data can be interacted with on the platform. And we partner with Cradle to Career for some local progress markers on their work and have been working with data literacy with them for the last 1.5 years or so. So Sage, I'll let you introduce kind of Cradle to Career a little bit.
Great, thank you. So Cradle to Career Santa Cruz County, formerly Cradle to Career Live Oak. We are a family advocacy organization and a community connector. One of our main missions is to bring together valuable community partners and connect them with local parents to hear directly from families about how we can support the hopes and dreams of them and their children, and also address any concerns that they might have. We work collectively to empower families, deliver resources, and advocate for equitable and inclusive support systems to eliminate disparities and ensure that all children throughout Santa Cruz County have the resources and programming that they need in order to thrive. We work on 4 pillars of good health, good education, good character, and community strength. And kind of how this work relates with the presentation we're about to share, and then the work that we do with the DataShare is because equity is one of our core values, and that means prioritizing accessibility and ensuring that community voice is reflected in our programming. So that means making sure our surveys are accessible to all members of the community. And that also we can share results back to the community in an accessible way, which is kind of what we'll be covering today.
Thanks, Sage. Yeah, it's been really fun working with Cradle to Career. So I'm just going to launch a quick survey because today we're going to talk about being surveyed and then seeing the results of surveys. So if you want to, let's see. What is your experience being surveyed in the last 12 months? So the first question is how often you've been surveyed. And then the second question is how many surveys that you've taken have been multilingual? And because we're so intimate, it's a short survey. And it looks like, Odalise, you have had a lot of experience with taking surveys that are multilingual, which is awesome. That means that good work is being done. I know that when we did this training in the fall, a lot of people responded to, being surveyed a lot, but actually not a lot of the surveys being multilingual. And that's one of the reasons why we created this guide. We saw a need with our own work for, some best practices. And then we really want to highlight that locally generated community data is so critical to the work that we do, so that we can make the data-driven policy decisions that are necessary. And also that the nuances are key. Our data platform, DataShare Santa Cruz County, provides general data from large data sets, this macro data, and the data that's collected and generated locally fills in the gaps for that, those large population trends. So we know that community-driven data collected in a language inclusive format is missing from the picture. So we wanted to do some work around that. So today we're going to work on, answering questions around what is data analysis, what you do with multilingual data results, how to translate them, how to review the data, and how to think about qualitative and quantitative data in analysis, and how to present data in a clear and accessible way. So why are we doing this? Schools, government, nonprofits, grassroots community members can all design and conduct and analyze surveys with the right tools. Creating multilingual surveys increases the impact of our surveys in our community by reducing barriers to participation and increasing access to information. And that's really the aim of creating inclusive surveys, to ensure that surveys deepen understanding around our community and what they're doing, what they need, what they want, and to increase engagement. So this, a good survey can engage a large group of people. It can be anonymous. And so people may not, want to share something publicly, but in a survey, they're willing to share it. And then thirdly, a well-done survey, when created and shared with communities in accessible ways, not just language and literacy, but also format and creating the trust it takes to really do good surveying, can increase the equity by uplifting the stories and data of historically underrepresented communities. So just a clear definition of what we're talking about today, we're going to talk about data analysis, which means taking a data set, extracting main themes, and linking those main themes and the numbers to your initial survey goals. So this can include these 4 main steps, which is translating the responses if your survey is multilingual, and then reviewing and cleaning the data, formulating an analysis plan, and just some basic statistical analysis. And then number 3, really setting yourself up for success around identifying themes, highlighting differences. If, there's a social, economic, geographic, or demographic assets to ensure that you're pulling those out of the numbers, and looking also at how powerful quotes can be. And then translating all this data and all this learning from the numbers into a visual format. So we'll start with number 1, translating the data. And Sage, you can share your experience.
Great. Yes, so for us, our big survey that we do each year is going to be our spring survey. And so we do 2 separate surveys for that since it is quite long. So we send one out in English and one in Spanish. And that makes it generally, at least in our experience, easier for participants because there's not all of the English and Spanish language meshed into one page. But one of the challenges that it does present is that now we have 2 different sets of data, one in English and one in Spanish, and begin to be able to really effectively go through that data. We want it all in one language so we can do our analysis and review, and especially because our primary data partner is an English speaker. So she needs all the data to be in English to extract any relevant themes and trends. So something that we were able to discover working alongside DataShare is a really useful tool in Google Sheets that allows you to translate your data kind of in mass. And so basically there's a function already that exists within Google Sheets through Google Translate that enables you to basically just select the data and then translate it into whatever target language you want to see. So the first step for having that done is being sure that your data set is imported into a data sheet. And so that means if maybe you're working off of SurveyMonkey, which is what we've done, or Google Forms, usually you should have the option to export a CVS file, which essentially just means that all of the data is taken from like the question format into a spreadsheet format, so you can view it all together. So I'm going to share my screen and show how to go through this process. Eva, could you stop sharing your screen, please? Thank you. Okay, can everyone see my screen here? Yes. All right, so this is a sample of what our survey responses from our English survey looked like. As you can see, a lot of these are going to be multiple choice questions. So a lot of the answers will look similar throughout. So while it is still important to translate all of our data points, I think generally this would probably be a lot more useful for qualitative data when there's a lot of different responses. So you can see here, I added in just columns for our Spanish translations, and then I have our English. So you will need the English in the same spreadsheet to effectively translate them into Spanish. So you can see this is the first example that I ran. Please indicate if you've ever participated in these activities. So I have the question translated, and then these are all the different responses. So I'll use this next column D and E as an example. So there's 2 ways you can find the Google Translate function. Either you can go to Insert, Function, Google, and click on Google Translate, or you can always delete that. I'll show you another way. You can always just search it in your help bar and then it'll pop up. So for simplicity, I'm just going to use that one. And then the formula, which was on the slide that Eva just shared, is going to be, you're going to insert the cell that you want to be translated. So in this case, I'm going to do D3, and then you're going to do a comma. And then first you're going to put the source language, which is the language that you want to translate is currently in. And so there's different kind of like codes, if you will, for each language, and you can easily Google them. But for English, it's EN. And then the next one you're going to do is your target. And for Spanish or Espanol, it's ES. And that's really all you need. You just need the cell number, the cell number, the source language, and then the target language. And then you press enter and loading, and then it will translate it. You could do that for each column, but a simpler way to do that is just to now drag down this, and it will apply that function into all of the columns and translate it. Again, if it's a blank column or if there's some type of error or it's not able to translate it, maybe you have the source language wrong or something, then a value like this will pop up, and that just means error. But I can just easily delete that since that is just a blank column. And now you have your Spanish translations. And something I will say in regards to this is it is Google Translate, so it's not the best translator out there. You can see like some of the things like art in the park, it didn't translate to arte en el parque. So it's not a totally foolproof process. And I always recommend having, if you have a native Spanish speaker on your team, or someone you could outsource that to definitely do that if it is really important that the data is, that the data is translated really accurately. But then again, for things like multiple choice, generally it doesn't need to be that specific, but I would say for qualitative data, you definitely want a second set of eyes to review. So I'll pause there. I'm not sure if there's any questions, or Eva, if you have anything to add, but that's just a good process to kind of do mass translations for your data sets.
I don't have any questions. I love this function, and I agree with you that it's great for the parts of your survey that are either multiple choice or yes, no questions, just that have a set answer. And it can just save you so many hours of translation.
Totally.
Which is,
and it's a pretty easy function, as you can see, to insert, but until we worked with Eva and another data partner, Sarah, we didn't really know that it existed. And if there's a way to make it easier for everyone, why not take that?
Yeah. Or Lilies, is this part of what you're working on, is like doing the actual translations in the Ventures project?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I never knew about this, so that's going to be a big help. Just double check that everything is good. Is less work than translate each of the responses. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Do you have any questions, or how do you normally do the translations?
I regularly I get the responses, and I know some of them. We have the questions, and also we try to use multiple choice, so that will be easy for us also to translate. And just the comments that they give in each survey is the main ones that we translate, so we can use it later. And also the provider is asking us to in a specific questions, we use it, and we, as I mentioned, try to do multiple choice because some of them is kind of difficult to translate, and also to give the same feeling of the response that the participants are giving to us.
Right. Great. Well, I hope this is helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think, okay, let me see if I can reshare here. One moment. So, let's see. Yeah, I loved when I learned about that. Okay, and we're back. So yeah, a little bit more, when we're looking at the numbers, just to set everything up for success, to do that analysis bit, you want to look at the data, and usually I try to sort the data in some really easy sort method, from highest to lowest, just to see if there's any outliers. Like if there was a range that I was expecting, or that most numbers are from 1 to 10 in response, and then I get a 500, then I know, okay, that's an outlier, that's an incorrect entry, so I'm going to avoid it. So I start by doing that, looking for outliers and any incorrect entries. If the answer is supposed to be a color and there's a number, I know that that's an incorrect entry. So just looking for those things first. And then I like to go back to my project sheet. Why did I do this survey? What was the goal? What are my project goals with collecting this data? What was the strategy that I want to link the numbers to? So this can be a good time to kind of check back in with your staff, make sure that everyone is on board for the goals of the survey. If you're working with a data consultant, this is when you really want to have those deeper conversations. And then And then you want to go and look at the questions again. So what information do you want to get out of each question? How do you want to disaggregate each question? So if the questions can be related to some, standard disaggregations like gender, race, or ethnicity, or geographic location, see which ones of your questions are most important to connect to that. So if you're asking a question about health, okay, like I really want to know what this question means for somebody who identifies, in this certain racial or ethnic category. So look at those connections as well. If you have a lot of data that is not multiple choice, if you have a lot of qualitative data, this can also be a time when you want to start just kind of coding themes. So if everyone's saying the same thing in their qualitative responses around a certain resource or a certain park that they're accessing, you might want to just start coding those. I like to just highlight them in my data sheet. And that's a basic coding, tool that you can use. For the analysis, so just again, staying basic, you want to find the mean, the median, and the count. So so that just means do the average. What are you looking at? What's the average theme? If you think it's important, you can look at the median, and that's the value that's exactly in the middle of the data set. And sometimes you don't know if the data set is going to be meaningful until you do these basic analysis. And then once you see it, you're like, oh, wow, no, that does make a really big difference in how I understand people's experiences. So even if you don't think you're going to use some of these, it's important to go through the exercise to double check. And then just the basic count, right? Like how many people responded, and so you can take a look at that. This can help you to develop any maps or tables of information. And while you're doing this, again, just to uplift some equity frameworks, you want to highlight any apparent differences in data responses that might be closely linked to social, economic, and/or an environmental disadvantage by comparing group values, exploring correlations, and showing any trends over time. So if you're comparing to a previous data set, and that's when you would want to pick out those questions that you were deciding on, these are the ones that I want to correlate. Let's take a deeper dive into seeing if there's any apparent differences in the responses. Any questions here? So that was for the numbers, and then for the stories. So Sage has, I would say, more experience with this piece, looking at qualitative data, but so jump in if you would like to, Sage. But the basics are just to put all the data in one place, and then to read through the transcripts, start to look at those themes emerging. And when you're thinking about developing a framework, I personally really like to have the goals of the survey or the goals of the project next to me, so I can start to connect the pieces. One thing that I did in one project was to actually add a line into my Excel spreadsheet and connect the theme of the quote that somebody said to the project goal. And then I would just code them right there in the Excel spreadsheet. So whatever system works best for you, so that you can kind of start tracking a little bit of the qualitative data. This is also the place where you can start to identify any powerful quotes or stories, and be doing that constant connection to goals and strategies. And I'll say it again, because I think sometimes it can get lost, is when you're doing looking at the stories and the qualitative data, also important to compare the group values, correlations, any trends over time that might be linked with any differences in the responses of people that might have to do with social, economic, race, or ethnic, or environmental disadvantage. So, because that data can be sifted through in the stories as much as in the numbers. Sage, do you want to say anything? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I think all of the points you made are great. And yeah, I think qualitative data can be more tricky, but I think there's a tendency to really focus on quantitative data when there is a lot of value in qualitative data. So I think one thing Eva said is just kind of linking it back to some of your like objectives or goals of the survey, or like things you're really looking at tracking, and then going through your responses and seeing what aligns. Like maybe, for example, maybe one of the things you're tracking is like community connectedness, and you know, people are sharing that, you know, they've felt like they've met new people or feel a greater sense of belonging, or whatever it may be. And then that's a really good way to kind of, as Eva mentioned, like how to code those responses into counting back to if you're meeting some of the objectives or goals. And then just, I wanted to say another piece about pulling quotes from surveys. I mean, usually, at least for us, like we don't do huge, we only do our huge survey once a year. So it's just a really good opportunity to get feedback from the community, and quotes have a lot of impact. There's one thing to be said that, you know, this percentage of people reported feelings of greater connectedness. But when you have a quote from someone saying, you know, like now when I arrive at my school to pick up my child, like I recognize the other parents and I feel more part of the community. And for our purposes, like that can be really impactful for grant applications, or for using on your website or other outreach materials. So yeah, just really remember that there's a lot of value in qualitative responses. While it might be kind of more work to look through them all and pull out big themes, I really encourage you, if you are working with qualitative data, to take the time to look through it and pull out important themes or quotes.
Yeah, and the final piece I would say about that is that qualitative data is extremely powerful when there's data gaps. So like if you're working with a population or in an impact area that is less known, that is the space where qualitative data can make a huge impact. Where, and actually I think Ventures has done this. I don't know if that has been your experience, Odalys, but I know like that sometimes it's pulling out the like, this is what's missing, that then will be the impetus for people to get involved and for greater data to be collected and focused on. I don't know, Odalys, if that's something that you've experienced. I know with the representational government report that I read through that you guys did, I think last year, I found that to be the case.
Yes, one of my co-workers use that type of like data review, and also we have another program that I'm part of it, that is ALAS, that we use that, the quantitative and also the qualitative data review, that we want the participants to like express themselves, and also we try to do a code form. So when we get the data, we are like, this participant mentioned this and this, but also we have a code about how they feel, how the program is helping them, and also how they're growing up.
That's great. Wonderful. Great. Any questions right now?
No, this is helped me a lot.
Okay, so I'm just going to switch gears just a little bit. We're going to move away from the numbers and start to talk about what it looks like to make the numbers make meaning for people outside of the data world. Data visualization and sharing is how we share the results and themes of our survey with those who responded to the survey, those who care about the population that took the survey, and any decision makers and the public at large. So this can mean that you are translating now the data and the themes and the findings into a presentation that is visually appealing and understandable, and that you're making a shared meaning from the experience of the survey. So here's the space where you can really ensure transparency, community values, and community voices. Sharing survey results back are an important part of being transparent with the community and demonstrating how we will use input to inform any future work. So, consider how you're going to share these results with decision makers who will be reviewing the report or analysis that you are putting together. Some key questions to think about before you start the visualization or sharing process are you fulfilling any promises that you made in the survey? Did you say that you were going to keep it anonymous? Is it anonymous? Did you say that you were going to connect it to advocacy? Are you connecting it to advocacy? Another key question to ask yourself is, can the survey respondents make meaning from what I'm presenting? Is it visually clear? And is the language accessible? And is the format accessible? So are you just be thinking about if you're adding any jargon or if the presentation length might affect the accessibility? And also the format, how are you sharing it? Is it a PDF or is it social media posts? Just make sure that whichever format you're choosing is connected to the goals of the project. Of course, if it's an internal report, you can make different choices around how detailed you want the results to look, how the demographics are presented, the number of respondents and distribution methods. And if it's an external report, this is sharing with the broader community, you might want to slim it down and consider just extracting some of the main themes and takeaways to share that are most relevant to your work and that would be helpful for the public to understand.
Yeah, and if I can just add something here, Eva, just to share an example and to just highlight the importance of finding a way to share back the data from your survey, just so that folks know that you did value their time and responses. Even if it's in a small way, for internal uses for our team, I've been hosting a set of trainings for them. And I've been asking for feedback to see how it's landing with them and what other topics they'd like to cover. And so even if it's just as simple as sending a follow-up email and just saying here are some of the key themes that, again, it was anonymous. So here are the key themes that folks mentioned that they want to cover. And here are some, tools that we're going to use moving forward that you all shared would be beneficial for you. So even if it's in that simple of a way, and again, I think that I'd recommend that more for smaller surveys, something more internal for something shared with the public. Again, I think you, like Eva said, having some type of visual or graphic is helpful, but just being sure that you're making sure you show participants that you value their feedback.
Thanks, Sage. I love that note because it doesn't have to be a lot more work to be in integrity with the goals of your project around, transparency and accountability. And it's important to remember that data is not just powerful and helpful for our projects, but it's also something that we own. So when we give it, and most of the time we give it for free, it really is, in my experience, extremely powerful when it's, the results are shared back with me, because it doesn't happen very often. Great. Okay, so what can that look like? There are multiple programs that can be used to make the data look like something that makes sense to normal people. Here are some programs that are useful in this. I'll say that my favorite one is Canva for the most part. I just find it to be really user-friendly. It's mostly free. You can access almost all the components for free. And it's really responsive, but I also have some experience in Tableau. And that's really helpful when you have a really large data set that you're going to use over time. So if you're doing comparisons every year, Tableau can be really, really helpful. I know that Sage has experience with a few of these other ones. Do you want to show an example, Sage?
Yeah, I'll pull an example from Google Forms. I would say that the way it's reported in Google Forms and SurveyMonkey is pretty similar. I think SurveyMonkey has a few more options for how it can be displayed. So again, if you're doing a more in-depth survey and kind of want more specific graphics, I would recommend SurveyMonkey, but I think most folks are pretty familiar with Google Forms, and they do a pretty good job of presenting a really simple graphic for your data. So can everyone see my screen? Yep, okay, great. So this is an example of a survey we did on, mental health after a training we hosted for promotores or community health workers. So depending on the question, it'll visualize your data in a different way. So you can see here how it's broken down, and it'll go just based on how the questions were presented. And I just think having the bar graph is really helpful. And then for like a true or false question, they'll be offered like a circle graph. Here we have another bar graph down here. Again, one of the problems with this is that it doesn't actually list the different responses. So you would have to, if you're presenting this data, like maybe go back to the original question and list what the responses were, just so that folks have a reference point for that. And then your like short or long text answer responses will just be listed down here. So again, it's not super in-depth or complicated, but if you just want to kind of get a clear snapshot of kind of where people are landing in response to a training or a workshop or whatever you're gathering data on, I think Google Forms does offer a pretty straightforward way to look at it. And then these visuals can always be either like screenshotted or copied and put into a presentation to share back with people, or if it's just for internal uses, you can just share this link with your team so they can, you know, get an idea of what folks are saying about that. Did you have anything to add there, Eva?
No, I think that was a great overview. Google Forms, I feel like they are constantly updating their summary, like how to visualize things. So it's like, yeah, sometimes I get frustrated because they don't label things. I can't just like transfer immediately, but I also really appreciate how simple it is. So
yeah.
Nice
One other thing I will share is that you can change how you're viewing the responses. So this is just a summary right now, but I can go to individual responses and kind of click through what each respondent has said. Again, this is an anonymous survey, so I don't have names, but maybe I wanted to see, I did collect names and I wanted to see what a specific participant said. I can go through, or at least like kind of get an idea of maybe one person answered a question and in a more extreme way, see how their other responses lined up with their first one or something like that. So it is nice that you can view it in different ways. You can also view it by question. But I think the summary is a good tool, again, for just kind of getting an overall snapshot of kind of how people are feeling about a certain topic.
Thanks. Okay. So if you want to do more than that, these are some of the options. I'll just say a couple things about how to think about visualizing the data that sometimes get lost. So anyone can do this. You don't have to be an artist or a digital designer of any sort. Some things to keep in mind around accessibility are to consider the color scheme. So choosing colors that are easy to read, make it accessible for colorblind people. You can align your color palette with the organization theme colors, you know, so you can brand. This is a good place to, if you haven't already, prioritize what information you're going to share. So going back to the data and seeing, you know, what are the key themes that we're finding, and be selective so that you're not overwhelming your audience. In a lot of these programs, you can easily select different graph options or different mapping functions, which might make your data more easily legible. So you can be more intentional about what method you use to represent your data, whether it's a circle graph or a bar graph. It can change the meaning sometimes of the visual format of the data in the visual format. So just paying attention to that and switching it around so you can see what looks best. And And then limiting the technical wording always. So keeping the language accessible for the general public. And I love this quote as a reminder. So as gatekeepers of data, we need to challenge the way we interpret data to ensure that we do not harm historically excluded groups. And even though I think that data science has come a long way, we can see how in this tweet from Sarah Ibram, people can either see themselves reflected in the data or not. And the tweet says, as an Indian woman, I can confirm that too much of my time is spent hiding behind a rock, praying for the terrifying gang of international giant ladies and their Latvian general. Don't find me. So I think that the person who tried to do this graph visualization, the intention was, to show the average height of those who identify as female in different countries. But there's a few things that are a little problematic. Do you guys want to share what you think you see as problematic? It's pretty obvious, but. Well, in addition to the sizes of these icons, I see also that the color is like super gender feminine. Yeah, and then the icons are like also very gender feminine. So keeping in mind, accessibility when you're choosing icons can be a helpful practice so that you're not isolating anyone. So how to do that? There's some key themes, and I'll say that these 5 practices are adapted from a Do No Harm guide that I'll link to at the end of the presentation. So you can learn a lot more about these practices from the Urban Institute. So critically examine your data and be explicit about limits. This is one that I think people shy away from because people don't want to admit that they don't know everything, but I think this is the place where you can really shine in that space. So just tell your audience who was included and who was excluded from the data collection. You don't have to say, anything more. You can just be explicit, and that's really, really helpful. You can be explicit about how the data was collected, why this data was collected, and who benefits or is potentially harmed by the data. Always use people first language. And what I mean by that is start with the person, not the characteristic. So instead of, or you can say people with disabilities instead of disabled person, a person with asthma, or communities of color are some standards that are now utilized. Making the labels for people, not skin color. So just switching things from Black people rather than Black can be a helpful and inclusive terminology change. And language is continuously evolving. So certain labels that maybe were acceptable years ago are no longer acceptable. So paying attention to those changes over time. And then ordering the labels with purpose. So you don't always need to just order the data in tables and graphs and charts as they are in your data, because this can reflect historical biases. So consider alternative sorting parameters such as study focus or a specific story or argument, or a quantitative relationship. You can also just stick to alphabetical or sample size, up to you. But this is like about grouping things with purpose. And then number 5, pay attention to what groups are not included in your data and consider adding notes to highlight how the data is either inclusive or representative. And also consider alternatives to labeling the choice other in a catch-all category. So this is another race, additional groups, other self-descriptions, people identifying as other multiple races, etc., or identity not listed. So you can also stick with that. I want to share, here's some options for color coding. Some legends with color schemes. On figure 12, you'll see a legend with a problematic color scheme. And then versus figure 14, an example of a color palette that avoids, gradients or hierarchies that might be based on a bias. So simple things that you can pay attention to, that you're not just doing again and again without purpose. Okay, we're going to keep going because there's these 10 equitable practices. So the last 5, the colors, icons, and shapes. I think we talked about that a little bit already. And then number 8, so you can always open the channel of communication with people and communities of focus. You don't have to wait until the report is done to reach out to people and communities that you're focusing your work with, so that you can create a final product that is most meaningful. And this will help with number 9, reflecting lived experiences. And number 10, consider the needs of your audience. So just make sure that the results are presented in a format that is most useful to them. If you know that your audience is a Facebook audience and that they're not going to open your email, it might be important to not spend a bunch of time on a newsletter, but rather spend a bunch of time on your social media post, so that you're really focusing in on the people that, need to see this information. I love this example. I think that they've done a great comparison of a standard bar chart, where they're really humanizing the numbers behind these poverty measures. And it looks like families across the board, and but it's also looking at the numbers and the economy based around these folks in poverty. So just some examples you can play around with. Great. So we covered a lot today. Some key questions is be thinking about who's benefiting from this data. Take the opportunity with data sharing to really build relationships with people and communities, and value people's time and compensate them if you can. If it's free donuts, great. If you can do more, gift cards, etc., even better. But anything is really helpful. So I'm going to stop here and see if you want to add anything, Sage, and if you have any questions.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's just an ongoing learning process for me. I'm sure for Eva as well. I think anyone who works with surveys and data, we're always finding new ways that our reporting is or isn't effective, and how to do that better. And I think just, especially when you're sharing data externally, just simplifying it as much as possible. I mean, I think that the general public isn't, data is something hard to wrap their head around, so that the easier and simpler you can make it for them, and just like really pulling out the key points to capture their intention. I think that's something that's really important. And just not trying to overload them. So just like really pulling out the main themes. Like maybe there was a question that highlighted a really important trend or really important like concern in a certain community. So focusing on those rather than trying to translate every single little piece of data that you gathered. It'll just, I think, give more attention to the points that you draw and keep people's focus better. So again, yeah, call on partners if you need, because data can be really complicated and overwhelming. So if you do have the capacity to outreach to other data partners, or just talk with folks who have a lot of experience doing surveys, I think that's really beneficial, because there's good practices in place and there's no need to rewrite the wheel every single time.
Thanks, Sage. I guess I'll just say also, I feel like the number 3 and 4 on this slide aren't super clear just by reading them. So with the feedback loop, this is like that idea that you want to not just give feedback one time to the people with whom you're working with to, collect their data and them to share back with you. It's a shared process. So think about every time that you are creating a survey, is there a way that you can just systematize an opportunity for survey respondents to share their experiences on an information or an issue or how an event has affected them? And then, that compensation piece around, people of color especially are so taxed, and then we're always asking them to give us their free data. So this is where the gatekeeping piece comes in. You want to state somewhere in your survey report to your funders or government bodies what it takes to collect this data from people, so that you can just start writing in whenever possible those compensation pieces. So if you're gonna present this to your funders, they need to know that there's a cost involved for people's times to respond, and if there's a way that you can systematize that in your reports, if it's just a one-liner that says survey respondents spent half an hour responding to this, and half an hour is $20 wages, or whatever, so that people can pay attention. And when you write it into your grant or into your report, people aren't confused by that, and hopefully that's a way that we can change the model of data collection so that it is more equitable and pays attention to people's needs over time, little by little. Great. So I think we can stop recording, and that's the